All right, and welcome. We are on to the next development video notes, and this is the prenatal development and newborns. Okay, and this is one of my favorite parts because it just shows you how amazing and what a miracle every single human being out there is. Like, we are miracles because from the moment of conception, there are so many things that happen that we aren't meant to make it, right? And so that we all made it and we all have developed into these amazing human beings. It's just absolutely fascinating, the human body and what it's capable of doing. All right, so that's my little snippet. So we're gonna start with conception, right? Like, how do humans even develop? And it's so amazing because it literally starts with two little cells, right? Two little cells coming together and they multiply and become a full-fledged human being with a life, thoughts. I mean, it's just amazing. So let's start with conception. So women, right? So woman is born, and we're writing all of this down as we go. So a woman is born, basically every woman is born with the amount of eggs they are going to have for the rest of their life. Okay, which is pretty fascinating that our bodies do that. So when a little girl is born, all of the eggs that they will ever produce will be within them. Okay, so those little cells. Now, as the woman, what she does is every month she releases a mature egg, okay, which is one little cell. And then that cell waits until there is a male sperm, a sperm cells that then reaches the egg and penetrates through. Now, interesting enough is that the woman's body is fighting these the what's this called? See, I forgot. The germs, right? Not germs, but you get it. So our bodies are fight to outside thing. Forgot. Oh well. You guys know what I'm talking about. Okay. So if once that sperm penetrates the egg, right, that is then essentially where conception happens. Okay. And then those cells, two cells come together, and essentially you're sharing 23 chromosomes from the mother and 23 from the male, and then boom, come together. Now, fewer than half of all fertilized eggs, they will survive, they tend to survive the second week, right? So many times, the eggs, though the sperm does penetrate the mature egg, it doesn't always last, right? And then nobody knows because then there's a menstrual cycle and then there we got it. Okay. But if it lasts past the 2 weeks, we go through the different periods of development. Okay. And you definitely need to know these. They're germinal, embryonic, and fetal. Okay. You need to know what happens throughout each one. And it's so fascinating. You know, we started with two little cells, and you'll see by the end that a human, when a baby is born, how many cells that have multiplied and how quickly. All right, so we're going to start with the first one, which is germinal period. And that is only about weeks 1 and 2. Okay. And this is the beginning of conception. And basically, in 1 week, and this is what we're writing down, this zygote, which is called a zygote, let me write that down for you. This zygote is made up of about 100 to 150 cells. So from two little cells came together, boom, in a week, they've multiplied from 100 to 150 cells. Okay. Now, within the second week, those cells will attach themselves to the uterine wall. Okay. And then essentially, that is what's going to get its nutrients, right, from the mother. So then we move on to the embryonic period. And this is about weeks 3 to 8. Okay. And this is when the cells start differentiating their what they're going to do, right? Like their function. So this happens during this time. And this is where the outer cells then become the placenta, right, for the baby. And this is where nutrients and oxygen are going to go from the mother to the embryo, okay? Because now we're going to be the embryos. All right, so this is so fascinating during this stage because it literally like it knows what cells to create, or like to the function, the like differentiated cells that are needed to basically survive. Okay, and the first thing that starts developing is the neural tube. Okay, so the neural tube is the first one, and let me see if I could zoom in here. You could maybe see it, but I doubt it. But well, the neural tube, I'm writing this down, is essentially what's going to be the spinal cord, right? And then from there, the spinal cord, that neural tube, think about it, it's when we talked about the brain, it's the older part of the brain. That is what develops first because it's the one that is in charge of the automatic systems in our body. So then we go from the neural tube, then we go to the heart. The heart is formed, the cells form it, and then it starts beating, right? Because again, we need that in order to survive. So it's quite fascinating that our cells know how to do that. And then from there, it starts the little legs, the arms, right? Looks a little weird, a little strange as you see here. Looks like very, very small, but the face also starts forming. And then you also get your intestines starts to form slowly, right? Like the main components that we need for survival are all developed during this 3 to 8 weeks. It's also a time that can be quite a little bit dangerous because many times the woman may not even know that they are pregnant because their menstrual cycle takes about a month, so they're not quite sure that they're pregnant yet. So usually by the 8th week is when people start finding out, like, hey, I missed a menstrual cycle. So this is really, really, really important that the woman, the mother is healthy and is well nourished, not taking any type of drugs, so that the baby, while it's developing, the most important parts of that we need for survival are healthy and well balanced. Okay. Then we go on to the fetal period, and this takes from about 2 months all the way till the child is born, which is about 9 months. And this now, it is no longer a zygote, it is now called a fetus. We were all little fetuses at one point, okay? And this is a fascinating time. Cells are multiplying exponentially, organs are developing. You're gonna start seeing that by 6 months. So make sure to write all those little things I'm saying. 6 months, the baby could actually survive outside of the womb. And I mean, it's fascinating the technology that's out there because babies are born like some of them from 5 months, and they're able to live, but they have to be like in an incubator, and kind of that time that they developed in the mother, it's kind of like the outside, right? And so the technology is fascinating. But by 6 months, all of the organs have been developed. They just are cooking, right, in the mother's womb. By this time in the fetal period, they're responsive to sounds. They have learned that the baby can distinguish the mother's voices, as well as the father's or whoever the caregivers are. Um, and then what they're saying is that there is learning of language even begins in the womb. So this could be that language acquisition component that we talked about, that our brains are wired for language. Okay, so right, so we go from little zygotes to full-fledged little babies. So cute. Okay, but there are threats to fetuses. You want to write this as another subtopic. And threats to fetuses while they're in the womb are called terathogens, okay? And these are basically any type of agents that can be drugs or viruses, okay? And any type of drug or virus that can damage an embryo or the fetus, okay? And one of the main drugs that they do talk about is alcohol, okay? So alcohol basically why women should not drink when they are pregnant is because it basically suppresses the activity in the central nervous system. And remember that these fetuses and embryos are connected to the mother's, the wall, the placenta, and everything that the mother eats and drinks and feels, those are all also going to the baby, right? And remember, like hormones, anything that goes into our bloodstreams, those also go to the baby. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this alcohol, when you're women drink alcohol when they are pregnant, this can lead to what they call fetal alcohol syndrome, okay, or what is called FAS. And this is basically if the mother is persistently drinking while the baby is developing, right? The fetus is developing, it could have birth defects both physically as well as cognitively, right, in the brain. So this, they can have lifelong physical or mental abnormalities. I've worked with children that have had fetal alcohol syndrome, and it definitely physically affects them, but more importantly, I think the cognitive part of it and their perception. They tend to have like smaller heads, they may have defects in limbs and heart, and they tend to have a below average intelligence. Okay, so make sure you get that. What are the effects essentially of terathogens? Look, and this is what I always say to my students, to my friends, like we never know what is developing at that particular time. If you do take a drug, any type of drug, or have a virus, we don't know how that really affects the child as it's developing. So, you try to decrease the risk because naturally, genetically, we are like wired in which we can like you just never know, getting two cells together, they could naturally create some type of disorder, right? Like a chromosome disorder. So why add something else, an external force that can affect the development of the baby? All right. Actually, and then so next one is also another terathogen can be sexually transmitted diseases, right, or infections, and this some of these STDs can be um, like transferred during delivery, or it could like HIV, which causes AIDS, right, can infect the fetus in the womb, and they can be born with AIDS, right? So that's something always why safe sex is very important, right? No STDs, because it could harm yourself and then the baby. And then you have the next one, which is preterm babies. And these are just babies that are born, what we would consider preemies or premature babies, are babies that are born prior to 37 weeks. Okay, and like I said before, there's so much technology out there now when it comes to this that babies are some of them are born for like at 5 months, 6 months, and they're able to develop. Now, many times preterm babies may have developmental disabilities, but with therapy and having an enriched environment, then they tend to overpass many of those problems. Okay. There's also been a link, something you want to write in there. Poverty has been linked to preterm babies having more new like nourishing problems, right? Because of that. Okay. And then that is it for newborns. And now we're going to talk about the physical developments in newborns and babies, right? So we're going to go into reflexes. And this is the cutest part of little babies. So cute. And reflexes, want to write this down, are basically our body's way. It's an evolutionary component to development in which reflexes are meant for survival. Okay, these are not things that we learn, these are something that we're born in order to survive. So keep that in mind as we're going over these different reflexes. Okay, the first one is going to be grasping. And grasping lasts about 3 to 4 months. So you want to know how long these reflexes last. And these are all reflexes in order for these babies to survive in the wild, right? And grasping is when you touch the palm of their hands that they curl their fingers and they hold on to the object. Okay, so this lasts about 3 to 4 months. And then around after that time, they still continue to do that, but they're saying it's a voluntary grasping. So they do it for connection. And they've been saying like there's a lot of studies out there that they're saying that grasping is a form of like that social connection with the mother. So very cute. All right. Second one is going to be rooting, and rooting is going to be when you touch the baby's cheek here, they will turn their face to the stimulus. Okay. And this lasts about 5 to 6 months. And this is used for feeding. Okay. And it goes with the third reflex, which is the sucking reflex, okay? Which is basically if you put anything in the baby's mouth, they're going to suck on it, right? And that is to be able to eat, right? And not eat, but they're drinking, right? They're drinking milk during this time. Now, this is permanent because, right, we need it to be eating. But it changes as we go, right? As our mouth develops, as our experiences, we learn, right? So that's why babies, you cannot just like give them food, right? Rice and beans. No, there's a process through that. Okay. The next one is going to be the moral. And this is when there is a sudden absence of support. Okay. This is where the baby feels like it's falling. Now, this is actually the only unlearned fear in newborns. So, quite interesting. And this what happens usually if there's a loud noise or the baby changes body positions, it will like thrust its arms and legs. It looks like really rigid. And then the back arches. So it looks like a very strange maneuver that babies have. This only lasts about I believe like five, no, 4 to 5 months it lasts. And then it shifts. It's not the same thing as being startled. Startled is a learned response in which there's an unexpected noise, and they typically will cry. And this happens later on. They're saying that that startled response is a replacement of the moral. Okay. Then we have the Babinski reflex, okay? And the Babinski reflex is when, it's so cute, when you touch, like their stroke their toes or their feet, sorry, their feet, their toes kind of like spread out like that, okay? And then their toes will curl inward. So once you touch it, the ball of their feet, their toes will go out and then they kind of curl in. And this lasts actually for a whole year. And what they're saying is that this is needed for walking. Okay. Then we have the swimming reflex. Swimming reflex is if a child is submerged under a short period of time, very, very short, they're able to hold their breath and pump their arms. This is why those videos, even though they freak me out, I can't watch them. That like they throw these little babies in the water and you see the baby like kind of like turn and like their hands up and move their hands and legs. That is that swimming reflex. Okay, obviously for a short amount of time. Don't be throwing babies in there, the water. Okay, the next one is going to be the stepping reflex. And this is basically when you hold the baby upright, then their feet touch the ground. It looks like they are walking, okay? And this is a reflex that goes about 8 months. And it is not that they're walking, but it is something that they need for walking. Okay. Many times they'll put a baby like in a walker or those little bouncy things. There is some occupational therapists and physical therapists that actually advise not to do that because it can, like, the baby is not ready to hold muscular, like motor wise, not ready to hold up its own weight. So it can affect their motor skills. Okay. Um, and that's basically it when it comes to reflexes. Then we have this concept of maturation. Kind of want to separate it from the reflexes. And this is a nature thing. This is when biological growth process that enables orderly changes in behavior, okay? Which is basically something that happens. We grow in like this slow process that it has nothing to do with our environment or experiences, okay? And of course, there's that controversy with this. But this is basically like every child is going to walk, right? Or every child is going to speak. So that's kind of like that maturation that just happens naturally with as we're growing. But it is in an order. So that's the key with maturation. It's an order of development. And then we have habituation, which is basically as it's the decrease in responsiveness with repeated experience or stimulation. Okay. So as a child or baby gets repeated exposure to something, it doesn't respond in the same way as it was like first learned, right? So it's kind of like a habit. Like, um, yeah, you're getting into the habit and you're not going to respond. It comes automatic, your responses. Okay. Um, and that's basically it for this one. And then last but not least, I know it's going a little long, but it's okay, is the motor and perceptual skills, right? So how do we develop as humans our motor aspect? And as parents, we want to make sure that we are not just taking care of the cognitive and social emotional, but that we're also developing the motor skills for children as well as perception. Okay, so motor development, as they say, it's a sequence. The sequence is universal. Everybody starts like kind of the same way, right? And if you look here, this is kind of like what the process is for your motor development. And when you guys were all babies, you could ask your parents that when you would go to the pediatrician, they would ask your parents, like, hey, like, have they rolled over or have they been able to pull up, their chests? Are they sitting up without support? Are they standing? Things like that. And then they measure it kind of like in this range that we want to make sure that they're doing that. And if they're not, right, then there's different ways of different activities to ensure that they're doing that. Like, so for instance, my daughter, she was not rolling over, like she wasn't sitting up either. She liked tummy time way too much. And so what ended up happening, I was concerned and I knew about this stuff and I knew the importance of motor development. I took her to an occupational therapist and then we were able to work with that. And I'll tell you, in seconds, that child was crawling and even started making more noises, started not speaking because she was little, but she started making more sounds and more verbal. So, which ties into why motor development is so important because that is the connection. So, what you're doing with your motor, they're connecting those neurons together, okay, and making the more motor development you have, the more neural connections you develop as well in the brain. Now, um, environment, obviously, for motor can affect its development, so make sure you're writing that down. Um, and then they also, something you need to know, that they tend to prefer sights and sounds. Okay, so that's why you see all these little toys out there that they have a lot of noises and sound and drives parents crazy. Or you might lose the batteries of them, but they are good for stimulating for the baby. What's not good is giving little babies iPads. Do not do that. It is way too much stimulus and the brain is developing very, very, very quickly, and we don't want it to develop make those neural firings so quick. Okay. Now they've also learned that the baby is able to turn their heads when they hear human voices, as well as they will gaze at more familiar faces like the mom, the parent, like whoever the caregiver is that they're familiar with. They tend to stare at that image a lot longer. Okay. Now, let's go into brain development, and it's fascinating what happens with the brain from the moment that neural tube is developed all the way till once they're born, okay? And if you see here, um, you will get, so let me write this down. So the developing brain forms nerve cells at a rate of nearly 1/4 million per minute. So as the brain is developing, that is how many millions of cells we have. This is fascinating. Now the brain cortex actually overproduces neurons, and which peaks at about 28 weeks of pregnancy, and then about it subsides to about 23 billion at birth. Okay. Now by age 3 to 6 years, I'm sorry, 3 to 6 months, or 3 to 6 years old, the frontal lobe is growing and planning and kind of organizing itself, our frontal lobe. So quite important during that time, the frontal lobe, though, and think about it, it's the last part of the brain that's developed. So it's the part of, because 25 years old is when it's fully developed. So it takes a really, really long time for that component to be a developed. And then we have the last part of this, which is memory. And what they're saying is that memory actually doesn't really begin, like the recall of memory, till about 3 years old. Um, and or some say like 3 to 4 years old. There has been some research that maybe at 2 years old, but not before that. And if there's any memory, what they're saying, it could be um, like people telling you the story. There's a picture, so you create the story within your brain. Okay, and that's about it for intro to development and prenatal. See you soon.